Welcome back, friends. Looks like I came back at the perfect time, as the last week of results are out for the current data slate. I got the last 3 weeks of data all set and ready to go, so sit back, relax, and let's get to it. Before I get started with the old YouTube pleasantries, if you like the video, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps push it out there for more people to see. If you really liked it, don't forget to subscribe to make sure you get all my latest videos. If you're looking for any other ways to help support the channel, you can check out my Patreon, patreon.com/warpfriends. Link in the description below. Just a quick piece of housekeeping here. Meta Mondays, the person I was getting my tournament results from, might not be able to keep doing this moving forward. So that means that I'm going to have to manually gather the data myself. So that means going through each tournament and going through each result and getting the sub-faction data and the win rates and everything like that. So the videos might not come out until Wednesday moving forward, depending on how long it takes me to gather the data. I'm still looking at a few other options to see what I can do, but so again, I'm going to have to probably gather them by hand, so that will slow down the process a little bit, but I am committed to making sure I get these videos out and keep doing this, so never fear, the videos will be there. They might just be a bit late. All right, let's get started. So one more thing to shout out, the Patreon poll that I put out at the beginning of the data slate to see who can guess the top 5 win percentages is at the end of the video, so make sure you stick around and see how you did. All right, first up is the player numbers from the previous week. So it was a bit of a low week this week, so we only had 589 players, and for the data slate, we're sitting at 12,746. Games played, we had 2,995, and for the data slate, we're sitting at 66,831. And for the tournaments, we had 16, bringing the data slate total up to 248. So the first shot we're going to look at is the win percentage by armies for the previous week. Just a quick reminder, the Games Workshop acceptable win rate is 45 to 55%, so anything in that range will be in green, anything 5% above or below will be in orange, and anything above or below that will be in red. So coming in number 1 last week, we had Adeptus Custodes with 61.9% win rate. We had Sisters Battle with a 61.4% and Deathwatch at 60%. Then we had Thousand Sons at 55.6% and Drukhari at 54.7%. And down at the bottom, we had Agents at 35.3%, Dark Angels at 38%, AdMac at 39%, Grey Knights at 40.8%, and Blood Angels at 42.3%. So I know I've been gone for a few weeks, and things looks like they've shifted a little bit since the point changes tonight came out. So Custodes coming in number 1 this week. That's nice to see. So we'll see if they can maintain it moving forward in the next data slate, but good week here for them. Sisters and Deathwatch both had really good weeks as well, but they had a very low player count, so you have to take that with a little grain of salt. With a low player count, 1 or 2 good results can really spike those numbers up. Thousand Sons maintained a pretty good win rate. Now I'm catching up on the data slate leaks and everything since I got back, and kind of looks like they might take a little bit of a hit, so we'll have to see how that is moving forward. If there's any Thousand Sons players out there, let me know what you think in the comments, how you're feeling about those changes. So Space Wolves at 54%, really good results for them. They've been doing pretty good since their Codex came out. Even Black Templars at 53% is finally starting to bounce back. It's been a rough go for them, so it is nice to see them getting some good results. Down the bottom, we have the usual suspects, Dark Angels, AdMac, Grey Knights, despite their new Codex. I mean, not surprising to anyone, but they're kind of floundering down there. AdMac did get some positive changes in the data slate from what I'm seeing, so it is kind of exciting to see what they're going to do moving forward. I think they're going to be doing better. I don't expect them to see them near the top. If they can pull up into the 46-47%, I think that would be a pretty good jump for them. Any AdMac players out there, let me know in the comments if you're excited for those changes or how that's going to affect your list building moving forward. So overall, interesting last week. A lot of highs, a lot of lows. Kind of always seems to be that way the last week of the data slate. It always seems to be a very low week for tournaments, and the numbers are all over the place. People maybe taking the week off or just kind of trying some random stuff before all the new changes come. So we'll see how it shapes out next week moving forward. But so far, decent results for the week. If not, interesting to see some new people on top. All right, next up we have army representation for the previous week. So this is the percentage of players who play each army. The average is about 3.6, 3.7%. So if everyone played everything evenly, they would be about 3.7%. So it gives you an idea of how many players are playing each army. So coming in at number 1 for the last week, we had Death Guard at 7.8. We had Space Marines at 5.6. Aeldari at 5.6, Knights at 5.3, and then World Leaders and Tyranids both at 5.1. And then down at the bottom, we had Deathwatch at 0.3, Agents at 0.5, AdMech at 1.4, Genius Stealers at 1.4, and Sisters at 1.5. Death Guard, not surprising, still in first place. We'll see how that changes next week moving forward when all these new kind of rules and data slate changes get populated. Next week is going to be a little sort of in between. Not every tournament's going to be using the new rules. I think enough of them might be switching over because it did come out almost on the weekend, so I think that's enough time for most of them to probably switch over. But we'll still have a few stragglers here and there. So the next week won't be a pure indicator of how things are changing, but it'll be a good start. It's the first time in a long time Knights have been below 5%. I think I checked this back since early June that they've been below 5%. Now it's only 4.8, but still a little bit of a drop there. People are kind of cooling off on Knights a little bit since the changes. And down the bottom there, Deathwatch is actually below Agent. So we had, I think, 3 or 4 Agent players last week. So that's good to see. And it's unfortunate for Deathwatch, but it is what it is. And Sisters, despite their really good results, they had a really down week for players, but those players who did show up did pretty well. And I think with some of the changes coming in the new data slate, I think they'll be doing a little bit better. They haven't been in a bad spot, but they can always do a little bit better. Overall, I think this kind of looks how it always looks. The representation charts are always a story of highs and lows, and this is no exception. All right, and next up is the combined stats for the previous week. So we have Army win rates, XOX1 percentage, and representation. Just a quick reminder, XOX1 percentage is the percentage of players who went 5-0 or 4-1 at a tournament. It's not a perfect stat, but it's a good way to kind of gauge how an army is doing in comparison to the win rates. The higher the XOX1, the more likely you're going to see them at the top tables, and the lower the XOX1, the less likely you're going to see those armies at the top tables. Coming in at number 1 last week, we had Sisters of Battle, then Genestealer Cults, Space Wolves, Aeldari, and then Necrons. And then down at the bottom, we have Agents, Admech, Grey Knights, Dark Angels, and Blood Angels. Like I said, Genestealer Cults and Sisters both had really good weeks, pretty high win percentage, really good XOX1, but very low representation. So despite their low rep, the players who did show up for them did very well, with over 30% of all their players going 4-1 or 5-0. Those are really good results. So Space Marines are a little bit interesting here, 46% win rate, but a 20% XOX1. So despite their low win rate, they had a lot of players do really well. So it's kind of a tale of like a small portion of the player base doing really well, and then the rest of them kind of doing mediocre to poor. And then down at the bottom, we had Admech and Agents, both with 0% XOX1, really low representation. And then we had Grey Knights, Blood Angels, and Dark Angels all well below 10% XOX1, which is really poor. Dark Angels had a little bit better, but overall, those three armies have struggled a lot last week. This kind of looks how it always looks, and it's an interesting last week to kind of see some new armies on top instead of just Death Guard and Imperial Knights, so that was a nice change there. All right, next up is the tournament wins for each army. So last week, Aeldari had 3 wins, Knights had 2, Tyranids had 1, Thousand Sons, Tau, Space Wolves, Space Marines, Sisters, Orcs, Genestealer Cults, Drukhari, Death Guard, and Demons all had 1 as well. Both Sisters and Genestealers both got wins despite their low player count, less than 1.5% of the rep. But like I said, they had really good win percentages and really good XOX1, so the players who did play them managed to pull out some wins there. And next up is the tournament wins for each sub-faction. You can kind of break down how each army is getting their wins. So Warhost for Aeldari picked up 2. Noble Lance, obviously, for Knights picked up 2. And then for Orcs, they actually got Tactical Brigade, which was fun to see. And then Chaos Demons picked up their win with Shadow Legion. Next up is the current win percentage by armies for the data slate. So this is about 14 weeks of data here, so it's a little bit longer of a data slate than normal. And just a quick reminder again, the Games Workshop acceptable win rate is 45 to 55%. So for the data slate, Knights coming in number 1 at 55.1%. Then we have Death Guard at 53.8, Genestealers at 52.8, Thousand Sons at 52, and then we have Chaos Knights at 51.4. At the bottom, we have Agents at 38.8, Orcs at 41.5, Space Marines at 43.7, Grey Knights at 43.8, and then Dark Angels at 45.1. So big winners for the data slate, clearly Imperial Knights. They've been dominating for almost the entire time. Took a little bit of a dip in the last couple weeks, but overall, you can't argue with an over 55% win rate, even if it's just barely over. And Death Guard as well did very well with almost 54%. Not surprising to see those two on top. And then down the bottom, also not surprising to see Grey Knights, Orcs, and Space Marines all kind of languishing below the 45% threshold. So hopefully some of the changes to Orcs will definitely boost them up a little bit. They got some pretty nice changes from what I'm seeing in the balanced data slate that's coming out. So any Orc players out there, let me know in the comments how you guys feeling about these changes. You guys have been kind of suffering for quite a while now, so hopefully these will be a little bit of a boost. And overall, it is a lot of green. A lot of armies fall within that acceptable win range. Only having 5 armies outside of the acceptable thing for Games Workshop is not bad overall. Week over week, the results were much more skewed, especially when it came to Death Guard and Imperial Knights. But at the end, it kind of balanced out to look okay. But where it kind of goes off the rails is when you get into the representation and the tournament wins, which we'll get into in a minute here. And that's when you can really see the big discrepancy. Next up is the army representation for the current data slate. So again, the average is about 3.6, 3.7%. So it just gives you a good idea of how many players are playing each army. So coming in number 1 for the data slate was Death Guard at 8.7. We had Imperial Knights at number 2 at 6.1. Then we had Chaos Knights at 5.3, Tyranids at 5.2, and Space Marines at 5.1. Then down at the bottom, we had Agents at 0.2, Death Watch at 0.9, Admech at 1.5, Black Templars at 1.6, and Drukhari at 1.8. So this chart basically hasn't changed over the 3 weeks of data that I've put in since I got back. Death Guard and Knights clearly at the top and by a long shot. And then Death Guard with an insane 8.7% representation for the entire data slate, which is, I think, the highest I've seen since I've started doing this. And then you have some armies who have been seeing some positive changes down the bottom. So you have Black Templars who only at 1.6, but the last few weeks they've been up over 3%. So I don't expect them to stay that high. Once the shine of the new codex wears off, they'll drop down a little bit, but I have hopes that we might see them up around 2 to 2.5% for the next Dataslate, if they keep up the success they've been having. Orcs, 3%. That's the lowest we've seen them in a long time. I do expect a little bit of a bounce back once the new changes pop out, because I think people will come back to the army a little bit after they got some updates there. So you'll see them probably back up around 4% after everything's said and done, maybe a little higher depending on how the results go. And Drukhari is another interesting one, 1.8% rep. They've been getting some good results, but they're always going to be one of those armies with a lower player count. Now, they are getting a new codex. From what I'm seeing, it's kind of been mixed results, and they didn't get really any refreshes, which is hugely disappointing for any Drukhari players out there. They were definitely in need of some new model refreshes, so that will hurt them a little bit. I think if they did get more of a line refresh like, say, Space Wolves did, you would see a lot more players come once the codex drops, so I don't expect to see them too high, but we should see a little bit of a bump there. Overall, this chart looks how it always looks. Not surprising to see who's on top based on the results, and not surprising to see who's on the bottom based on the results down there. All right, next up is the combined stats for the current data slate. So again, it's win rates, XOX1 percentage, and representation. And quick reminder again, XOX1 percentage is the percentage of players who went 5-0 or 4-1 in a tournament. It's not a perfect stat, like I mentioned, but is a good way to see how an army is doing, especially compared to their win rate. The higher the XOX1, the more likely to see them at the top tables with a better chance to win tournaments. So coming in number 1, we had Death Guard, then we had Knights, Genestealer Cults, Thousand Sons, and then Sisters of Battle. And then down at the bottom, we have Agents, Orcs, Admech, Grey Knights, and Emperor's Children. Overall, this chart looks how it's always looked. Really not too much difference here. The armies at the top are not surprising for how well they've done. A little bit surprising to see Genestealer Cults with the highest XOX1 percentage, but they do have a lower representation, so if you do have those like faction specialists playing them, you will get some better results overall, percentage-wise. But the fact that Death Guard, Knights, and even Thousand Sons and Sisters all finished above 20% XOX1 is pretty remarkable. That's a pretty high percentage. It was a good bounce back data slate for Sisters after they've kind of suffered for the last little bit. It is nice to see them back up to at least around the averages or slightly above. So, and with the changes coming, they might actually be doing a little bit better. So we'll have to see how it goes, but they're in a pretty good spot right now. And overall, you know, I don't think it's great chart based off of how high some are and how low some are. A lot of armies, we've got a couple armies below 10% XOX1, and a lot of them sitting just above 10%. But that's what you're going to see when you have 3 or 4 armies that are dominating as much as they are in those categories. So hopefully with some changes and the challenger cards going away, we'll see a little bit better results, a little bit more balance next data slate, especially if Death Guard and Knights are kind of pulled back down a little bit. They won't have such a lead over everyone else, and we'll get those wins and everything else spread across a few more armies. All right, next up is the Army Tournament wins for the current data slate, and this is broken down week over week, so each color represents a different week, just so you can kind of see when each army is getting all their wins. So coming in number 1 for the data slate, we had Death Guard at 41, and then we had Knights at 23, Aeldari at 22, and then Chaos Knights at 14. And then down at the bottom, we had Agents as the only army without picking up a tournament win. So obviously Death Guard dominated in the tournament wins with 41, almost double the closest competitor there with Knights at 23. Aeldari did pull their weight, getting 22 wins. That is a lot, and then it's a steep drop-off after that, down to 14, and then it just keeps sliding down from there. So this is one of the most imbalanced charts that we've seen, with one army getting so many tournament wins, and then even the second and third place being that much further above 4th and 5th. So hopefully next data slate, this will be a little bit more smoothed out, and we can sort of spread some of those wins from Death Guard down to some of those armies who didn't pick up too many, like Space Wolves, Tyranids, Emperor's Children, and it's kind of balance this out a little bit. All right, for the first faction focus, we have Imperial Knights. So for the faction focuses, I did Knights and Death Guard because they've been kind of the boogeymen for the whole data slate. So I thought it'd be good just to take a look and see how, I guess, overpowered they really were. So looking at the previous 8-week results here for Imperial Knights, you can see that their win percentage has actually dipped down. I say quote-unquote dipped down to 50% roughly for the last few weeks, which is still like right around the average, which is very respectable. And their representation has gone down from about 6 down to, well, just this week was about 5. But overall, they've been maintaining about a 6% representation, which is well above the average. Looking at their stats for some meta average, you can see their win percentage is over 6% higher than the average. So 55 versus 49, basically. Army representation is almost double, 6.1 versus 3.6. XOX1 is 6 points above, again, almost 7 at 22.7 versus 16. And tournament wins, they have 23 versus the average of 9. So not surprising to see that they've dominated. Basically, they're well ahead in every single statistic. So stats kind of back up what everyone's been feeling for the last 14 weeks. It's been a pretty rough go by the sounds of it. And hopefully, moving forward, things will be a little bit different. You don't want one army doing this well across all stats. Their sub-faction data is kind of boring because Noble Lance is really the only thing that people are playing because they don't have their codex out yet. So this should look a little bit different next Dataslate as well. Noble Lance had 99% of the players, and they had a 54.9% win rate. And all their tournament wins, unsurprisingly, came with Noble Lance. So again, Knights kind of just dominated the entire Dataslate, not surprising. And I think they'll be dropped down a little bit with all the changes. They've already kind of got some nerfs to some of the rules in their codex before it was really fully released. So, you know, I think they'll be brought down to earth a little bit, but I don't think they're going anywhere. I think they're still going to be a dominant force in the meta. All right, and the next faction focus is Death Guard. So these guys, I guess, were kind of the real boogeyman. While Knights had more higher statistics across the board, Death Guard won like almost twice as many tournaments. So it's hard to really say who was doing worse, but at the top tables, it was definitely Death Guard. So looking at the previous 8-week results, you can see their win percentage has actually dipped down the last 4 weeks, down to, again, like Knights, around 50%, completely respectable, whereas before it was 50, 56, well above the average, and now they're sitting at just a little bit above the average. And the representation has taken a little bit of a hit, dropping from like almost 10% week over week down to about 7 to, and the representation has taken a little bit of a hit. They were up around like 9 to 10% week over week, and now they're down around like 7 to 8, a little bit higher than that. So again, still a ton of players, not really anything too concerning. If this was any other army, they would still be near the top of the meta, so they're in a really good spot. Army stats for the meta average, much like Imperial Knights, they're well above in all categories. Win percentage 53.8 versus 48.7, so almost 5% above. Army representation is almost triple at 8.7 versus 3.6. XOX1 is 21.7 versus 16, so well above there. And tournament wins is 41 versus 9, so they're almost 5 times as many tournament wins as the average army should have. And looking at the sub-faction player counts there, Virulent Vectorium has 45% of the players, and then Mortarion's Hammer and Champions of Contagion make up another 45%, so then you have everything else kind of making up that last 10%. Clearly, 3 sub-factions doing most of the work, with Virulent Vectorium making up a large majority of the players. Every faction had over 50% win rate, with the only one being below that was the Death Lord's Chosen, which no one really played anyways. Unsurprising, you know, that they did really well when every single detachment that they had a 50% win rate or higher, which is almost unheard of. Usually it's just 1, maybe 2 detachments that do really well. So again, not surprising how well they played out. And then if you look at their sub-faction tournament wins, it was split between Mortarion's Hammer, Virulent Vectorium, and Champions of Contagion. Death Lords actually did pick up 2. So even the detachment that's kind of suffered, quote unquote, still got 2 tournament wins, but most of them are won by Mortarion's Hammer or Virulent Vectorium. Overall, clearly the sort of boogeyman of the Dataslate, winning all the tournaments, especially early on. They were just completely running everyone over. It slowed down a little bit in the last few weeks, but their lead was so crazy high that no one was going to catch them. And hopefully they'll be brought down a little bit. If anything, just the tournament wins need to be, you know, cut in third, and then it would still be really, really high, but at least we could see some other armies getting some wins. If there's any Death Guard players out there, let me know what you think of the new Dataslate changes. How's that going to affect you? You think it's going to sort of bring you guys down too much, or kind of just bring you back down towards the middle? So yeah, let me know what you think. And last up is the Patreon poll results. So this was something I did 14 weeks ago when the Dataslate first started. I had anyone who wanted to go on to the Patreon and become a member and vote to see if you could guess the top 5 win percentages. So we're going to go through here and see how everyone did. So I had about 10 results, but only 7 people left me their names. So these are the only ones that I included here. So for the top 5, Imperial Knights, this was number 1, and no one actually guessed that correctly. We had Black Templars, Death Guard, Death Guard, Death Guard, Blood Angels, Demons, and then another Death Guard. So everyone got that wrong, but anyone who is bordered in green did pick the right army, just picked it in the wrong spot. And then coming in number 2 for the Dataslate was Death Guard. So we have 2 people who actually picked it correctly here. We have, so if I butcher any of these names, guys, I'm really sorry, but we have PG Cario, I'm just going to say that. He actually did guess it correctly. Yes, I Am did pick Knights, so they did get the right army in the wrong spot. Meep the Great picked Chaos Knights, so he was the only one who actually did pick Chaos Knights, and he picked them, but in the wrong spot. And then we have Corey Brewster, who did pick Death Guard in the right spot. And next up was Genestealer Cults. So this one kind of threw everyone for a loop. I don't think anyone actually did pick Genestealer Cults, so they're all wrong there. But we did have 2 people, so PG Cario did pick Knights, and Meep the Great did pick Death Guard, just in the wrong spot there. And moving on to 4th place was Thousand Suns. So Thousand Suns is one that a few people did get correctly here. So yes, I did pick it correctly, and actually I did pick this one correctly. The only one I did get right. So, you know, even if I look at stats all day, it's not like I have any better guess than anybody else. And so Train QWERTY did pick Knights, and got the right army, just in the wrong spot, and so did Meep the Great. So next up we have Chaos Knights, and this is one that only one person did pick. So this was kind of another one of those sleeper armies that I don't think people really thought would be that good, or at least in the top 5. But we did have a few people pick Thousand Suns just in the wrong order, and that's pretty much it. So overall, Meep the Great did pick 4 of the right armies. He just had them in the wrong order, but that was the highest count. Then we had a few people who picked the right armies in the right order there. We had a couple for Death Guard and a couple for Thousand Suns. And then, you know, we had Yes I Am had 3 correct. Train QWERTY had 3 correct. PG Carrier had 3 correct. I only had 2, and then Corey Brewster had 1. So overall, I think we'll give it to Meep. He had 4 out of his 5 guesses right, just in the wrong order. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Was this something you guys want to see some more of every once in a while? I won't make it a regular thing, but if you guys like it, we can always make a couple polls here and there, when the mood strikes. And that's it for this week, guys. Thanks for watching. Shout out to the Patreon members, Meet the Great, John Gurman, William Viz, and Staic. And for my YouTube channel members, Andrew Stone. Again, if you'd like to join these people, check out my Patreon, patreon.com/warfriends. And you guys' support is appreciated more than ever now that I'm going to have to manually sort of gather all this data myself. Hopefully I can figure something out where it's not so labor intensive, but for now, that's my options. I'm not going anywhere, but again, it might just take a little bit longer than usual. So with some changes on the horizon, I think everyone's a little bit excited to move out of the current meta and try something new. So good luck in the tournaments coming up next weekend, guys, and I will see you next week.